No, maybe.
Yep, we got it. Good.
Yeah, shut up.
Yep.
Okay, so I see some familiar faces on the call, most notably Seth Jewell, but we'll leave him there for now. My name is Matt Call. If you've never run into me before, I am responsible for Windows security in Microsoft Intune. I am also partially responsible for security settings management with about 4 other colleagues for the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint product. And I have a long history in security and started in OS deployment, as some of you may know. So the goal here today is to give you a little bit of an overview of EPM. I can answer any questions you want. I fare myself a rather technical product manager. So yeah, you should feel empowered to come off of mute anytime, interrupt me if something doesn't make sense. I only have 50 minutes, and usually when I do this presentation, it runs way over. So I'm just gonna get into it and start knocking away here. So first thing that I want to cover is that you guys have all probably seen this by now, but we introduced the Intune Suite, and endpoint privilege management is a part of Intune Suite, specifically around managing the ability for IT pros and security professionals to allow list or block list, essentially the ability for apps to elevate on a device. Okay, this is a project we've been working on for a really long time. I'm almost embarrassed to say how long, but it's a year plus. And it's really important to us. It's really important to give people a decision on, how much can elevate on a device, not just a Boolean yes or no, admin or not, right? And this is really, EPM is a really good example of what the Intune Suite is all about. If you're not familiar with it, the Intune Suite is a set of products that we set up brand new. They ride on the Intune backbone, but they're very much their own products in their own right. EPM is one of those where we built from the ground up to solve sort of this scenario, this long running scenario of around elevation management. So, any security person who's ever been any good at their job knows that running a standard user significantly reduces your attack surface, right? I mean, this has changed pretty dramatically over the years. If you think about Windows management in general, Microsoft has been managing Windows devices for almost 30 years now in enterprise environments. And when we started managing Windows devices way back in the day, it was probably a Wednesday, people only interacted with technology at work, right? So they got the configuration that they were given and they just made it work, right? Well, what's happened over the last 30 years is people use more technology at home than they do at work sometimes now. And when they go to work, they plan on interacting with that technology the same way that they interact with their technology at home, meaning they want to have full control over these devices. And we know that that leads to bad things happening because end users don't really make great decisions all the time, right? From a security perspective, the weak link is usually between the keyboard and the chair, right? So what we need to do is we need to allow enterprises to sort of give that flexibility and maintain that productivity. So that way these end users stop throwing sort of these perception blockers at their IT staff around, hey, I couldn't get my work done because I couldn't install this tool that I'm not allowed to use on my device, right? Or I couldn't repair Office, or I couldn't do all of these different things. So it's a balance. It's a balance between security and productivity. And that's what's really changed over the last 30 years is, before you could be very, very direct about, these are the rules, I'm going to stay with those rules, and it doesn't matter, this is how the device operates. But today, every enterprise has to operate at scale. They have to balance that security and productivity. You don't have a choice. So the question really is, which scale do you choose to operate? Do you choose to operate the scale that's very manual and help desk intensive, that requires you to basically approve support tickets, log in on a device, do app installs, do printer driver installs, all of these things? Or do you leverage a tool either from us or from another vendor to help manage that elevation criteria? So for us, when we looked at this and we were starting to build this product set, I remember saying to one of my colleagues at the time who was helping me build it, Mr. Mark Shepard, I remember saying to him, like, hey, we just need to have a Microsoft solution for this. We need to have a set of tools that give customers an option. In the vendor space, sometimes you can end up, looking at products that have more than what you need. And for us, like, we need to provide that simple sort of foundational capability of, hey, I want to control which apps can elevate or not on a device. That's what I want it to do. It has to do it well. It has to be built into a tool I already use. And it needs to just work with every version of Windows. We don't want to mess around with, testing new agents, deploying new agents, new service infrastructure, so on and so forth. So that's really like the foundation of EPM, and the 3 to 6 months of design and architecture that it took us to land on the solution is like, that's really the goal. Is let's give people a simple, easy product that they can use to do elevation management, and we'll grow over time and add those features and capabilities that enterprises need to tackle those complex scenarios. So endpoint privilege management is available as part of the Intune suite or advanced management offering, or as a standalone product, right? We license that on a per user per month basis, just like every other M365, every other Intune suite, or every other Intune product, every other product that essentially goes through M365 licensing. And what I would tell you is that there's a lot of feedback on the list price for EPM and the list price for Intune Suite. And I'd really encourage you to have a conversation with your Microsoft account teams around the pricing that would be offered to your organization, because Microsoft licensing and price negotiation is probably a PhD program somewhere at Harvard or something. So it's just really important to know that, like, yeah, this is the list price, this is what's out there, but make sure you talk with your Microsoft team. Just say like, hey, what would this actually cost me if I was to look at it? So you get a good idea of, what your organization might need to commit in order to use tools like this. And our goal, like I said before, is seamless elevation management built into Intune, powered by Intune. Like, we ride on the Intune guardrails. We're pulling Intune forward in a lot of ways. A lot of the infrastructure we use is what we call Intune of the future type infrastructure, where we want to add new infrastructure foundations to Intune to be able to support the ever-growing device landscape. And then the last thing is, we wanted a rich set of insights for user experiences, right? For elevation, right? If you ever tried to look at processes that elevate on a device, you'll quickly notice that you need to have some sort of background in data science to rip around like what actually happened on the device, what actually like the user was trying to accomplish, because so many processes and sub-processes get spun up in Windows that just looking at processes that have elevated tokens or elevated sort of permissions is virtually impossible. So for us, what we've done is we've taken a lot of noise out of that. Our reporting is in more of a raw state at public preview. We're working to refine those reports and give different slices to show you different, like, help you draw different conclusions, I guess is the best way to put it. But the raw data is there. I mean, if you look at reporting in EPM, every app that you see in EPM that's reported as elevated was something that the end user clicked on or right-clicked on and hit run as administrator, right? And it's no con hosts or crazy Explorer noise or anything like that. It's literally just the stuff the end user tried to accomplish. So that way you can build the right rules to allow the right elevation sets on your devices. So before we go into this, let's introduce sort of a fundamental concept for EPM, this concept of a rule. And this is in the docs. I might be partial, but the docs are excellent. So if you have any questions about how this works or anything like that, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat right now before I forget. Into EPM docs. You can go right to that docs site, and we have everything from deployment considerations, different things you need to know, to guidance for creating great rules, to how to set up the product the first time. And if there's something that you're wondering that you don't see there, you should feel empowered to send me an email. Send Scott an email. Let's volunteer Scott. I like that. So we'll volunteer Scott. We'll send Scott an email, and we'll just edit the docs, and we'll get you the guidance you need. So yeah, so please, feedback early and often on that would be great. Or open up a GitHub issue. Our doc writers are looking at that right now. I mean, I got 4 or 5 of them today, so we look at those pretty quickly. So back to the presentation that was scheduled here. So linking an app to an action is what we call a rule. So on the left-hand side, we have an application or a binary. This could be sort of any app or sort of any executable that runs on a device. That binary has a set of metadata, things like file version, file path, signature, signer signature, like internal name, product name, like there's all sorts of stuff there. So I define like a detection or a rule, the detection side of the rule, and then that links directly to an elevation action. We'll cover those elevation actions here pretty quickly. The first one here that I want to cover, though, is those detections, right? There's two ways that an app can be detected. It can be sort of based on the metadata that you've provided. So you've provided a file name or a signer or whatever that is, right? So when that app goes to execute, we've said, hey, we need to be involved here because this app should be running elevated. Step one. The other way that you can get apps into there is through our right-click context menu, known as Run with Elevated Access, right? So the end user, it's essentially run as administrator, but a different entry point. So Run with Elevated Access. And what that allows you to do is that allows end users to manually sort of ask to run an app as admin. This is super useful for user confirm scenarios, which we'll cover in a second, where you might want to create a rule for, let's just say, PowerShell.exe to be able to run as admin, or a user to be able to run that as admin. But you don't want every instance of PowerShell.exe to run as administrator, right? Because that'd be bad news bears, right? So this allows you to define a rule in such a way that you can just say, hey, I'm going to run this with elevated access, and yeah, and then they'll run it through the right-click context menu to get that elevated process going. There's three sort of actions. The first action is automatic, which is, as the name implies, completely automatic. We'll dive into that here in a second. The second one is user confirmed, which again is similar to UAC, and we'll cover that more in a second. And the third one that isn't listed here, or is listed here, but it's a different color, will be coming in the July-ish timeframe. I use the ish as a product management technical term. This is active development. So, our plan is over the summer in the Northern Hemisphere that we will deploy that support approved scenario. That'll allow your support team to approve individual requests. I'll cover that here in a second. So first one is automatic elevation. It's completely seamless. If you define an automatic rule, every time that app launches, it's going to launch as admin. Users don't even know. They double click on an app, it just runs elevated. There's nothing else to do. It just works all of the time. The app will launch underneath a proxy context to facilitate that elevation. And yeah, like I said, we have some higher guardrails here for definition of the metadata, because we don't want you to create rules that are like, hey, automatically elevate everything on the C drive. That would be, again, bad news bears. So, you have some specific things that you have to do to define an automatic rule. Those are all in our docs. Those are also, in the UX, in the user experience, that'll warn you if you try and do things that you're not allowed to do. So yeah, that's automatic. And then the second one is user confirmed. This is the other scenario that's in public preview right now. And user confirmed is similar to UAC, right? So at its base and at its core, it's just a continue cancel button here, as you see right here on the screen over here. But where we're better than UAC from a user experience perspective or from an enterprise management perspective is that we allow you to configure additional options on top of just a continue cancel. So that way you can get feedback from end users, like things like justification, things like, make the user authenticate again, right? Those sort of things can be required before you complete an elevation, and they're required on a per app basis. So you could have, a handful of apps that just require continue cancel because you trust them. And then you have other apps that maybe you want to make sure that the end user's there, or, whatever, you want a justification from them, whatever. You can specify those apps to be used there. And then lastly, there's support approved, and support approved is very similar to user confirmed. The big difference, though, is that if an app is unknown, does not have a rule created potentially, or you define a specific rule, you could define the experience to be a support approved elevation, which means that the request would go to Intune into a console. That request would then be approved. And then once it's approved, the end user could complete the elevation on that device for that binary for a specified period of time. And this is really a repair scenario. So, what are we trying to solve here? We don't want people giving out admin passwords to do one-off installs. Like, that doesn't make any sense. We're giving unguardrailed access to an end user in form of an admin password, so that way they can install Notepad++, or they can install Office. And as long as they have that admin password and it's valid, they have unfettered access on the device. They can do whatever they want. Not to mention that if you were to use just like a support professional was over the shoulder going to log in, You've also now cached credentials on that device of a highly privileged user. If that device is compromised, you could use those credentials to laterally move in the enterprise, right? So like, we don't want you to do either of those things. What we want you to do is we want, the end user to right click on an app and say, hey, I need to run this with elevated access. Support approves it in Intune. And then boom, it just is allowed to elevate right on the device, and no elevated credentials needed from another user, or no, credential gymnastics across teams, screen shares, or anything like that. So really our goal for support approved. And like I said, our timeline for preview on that is in the July-ish timeframe. We're targeting the summer. That timeline will shore up as we move through the June timeframe, when our development is hitting critical mass, and we're in really good shape. So yeah, so key operational points: the solution is disabled, enabled, all that stuff right through Intune. Administrators can gather intelligence on elevations before removing admin rights. So that's really key. You can deploy our solution prior, and then, see what's elevating and create rules. You can do that. That'll be fine. And then all those insights, arbitrary scenarios, they're all in Intune. So I have gone through a lot of this stuff here real quickly. I'm going to pause for a second, as I just installed the Windows Update right before this presentation, and it closed my browser window. So while I open my browser window, are there any questions from the group here? I promise I won't bite any good questions or bad questions. The only bad question is a question that doesn't get asked, right? So anything from the group? Nothing. Oh, man. This is education, right? This is EDU. So I feel like I'm a teacher at the front of the classroom. Like, come on, does anybody have any questions? And nobody's got any questions. Yeah.
All right, I'll go off mute if no one else does.
Okay. Okay.
So I was typing it, but I'll go off mute and ask. I think I know the answer to this, but the part about gathering intelligence before removing admin rights, is
Sure.
that gathered via any run as administrator type of action on an endpoint, or does the user have to use the special context menu for the EPM solution, or for that to be collected telemetry wise back to Intune?
Well, Bryce,
I don't know if I'm making sense.
A good question is a question everybody wants to know, but a great question is a question that leads into the next part of the presentation. So I really appreciate you asking that question. I'm going to answer it for you right now, so that way you get some answers on it. Is that cool? Okay. So what are we going to do here? Well, first thing we're going to do is, let me see if I'm still logged into this other tenant. See, am I still logged into it? Yeah. Okay, cool. Oh man, let's see if I can do this. I want to show you what an elevation looks like on a device, and I just realized that my lab tenant's off. So let's. Oh man, who put all this security in place? Was that you? Was that Scott? Scott, you putting all the security in place on me?
I think it was Seth. I think it was Seth Jewell.
Oh, Seth Jewell. Oh, I gotta change my password. What is this garbage? Oh my God. What demo God type? Let's just use the suggested password. Let's update it. Let's sign in. There we go. See if we can get off to the races here. Holy smokes, that worked the right way the first time. Okay, so let's spend some Microsoft money all together now. Start all of these VMs. There we go. All right. So let's come back over here to the console. So the first thing that you do is, when you're going to set up an EPM in your environment, is you click that activate button. Hopefully you can trust me that it works. We've seen a number of activations, and our failure rate is sub like 0.2% at this point. The failures that we have seen clicking the activate button have mostly been attributed to custom roles in Azure AD and not having the permissions that somebody thought that they would have. If you do see a failure, there's a pretty good chance that we're going to proactively reach out through your account team. That's what we've done so far. But everything's going pretty well there on that front. So you click on the activate button, and then you'll land on this pane, right? So the first thing that you'll do is that you'll come in here and you'll create what's called an elevation settings policy. Now, an elevation settings policy is for the client. Before our naming folks got a hold of this, the name of it was the client settings policy, and I thought it made a lot more sense. However, I am not in charge of naming at Microsoft. I'm not sure that anybody is, and it was changed to elevation settings policy. The key here is is that this controls the behavior of the EPM components on the client side. So this is what controls everything that's, everything on the client itself or anything on the client side itself. So a few different things that are controlled here. The first thing is whether you want endpoint privilege management turned on or off. Now, endpoint privilege management will not turn on until it gets this specific enable command from the Intune service. And that's really important because a lot of people, when they activate EPM, think that they're going to somehow I don't know, degrade their entire tenant by clicking the activate button or do something that's, you can never take back. Nah, it's fine. Deploying this settings profile is what will turn on EPM on devices. Okay, enabled, enables it, disabled, disables it. One thing I'll mention here about this is that if the policy is removed and you don't explicitly disable EPM, then what happens is EPM stays running on the device. And you might ask yourself, well, Matt, why would you do that? Easy. Sometimes IT admins work late nights or early mornings where they haven't had their coffee, and they make maybe poor choices around removing and adding devices to groups. We do not want to create mass provisioning events because somebody removed a group from a device. Like, we just don't want to do that. So if you need to turn EPM off, you should create a policy called EPM disablement or disabled, set this toggle to disable, and deploy it out to your devices that you need to turn it off on. So important point there. The second one here is going to be data that's sent to Microsoft. The string's wrong. It should say data for reporting. It's going to get fixed, so don't be alarmed when you see it there. But essentially, this is controlled yes or no. This is your data coming off the device control. This is, if you set this to no, Microsoft will get no data on the device. It'll still consume rules. It'll still work. All that stuff will be great, but no data will come off the device in terms of elevations and that sort of stuff. So we'd like you to set this to yes, because it makes our reporting features a little bit more valuable when there's actually data in the tables.
Crucially, is that also the same thing that allows us to gather that pre-telemetry? Like if I'm interested in who's elevating what, if I set that to no, and Microsoft isn't getting the data, but I'm presumably also not getting it inside of my view as well.
Yeah, Bryce, man, you're knocking it out of the park today. So this next question here, reporting scope, right? When you set to yes, there's a subsetting here, right? There's reporting scope here, and you'll see three options. So let's walk through all of them one by one. Let's start at the bottom. Diagnostic data. If you set this to yes with diagnostic data, the only thing that we get is health about the EPM client components on the device. Now, this is normal, like diagnostic data about the components that we use, and we use this data to make sure that we don't have any crashes, any issues on the client. Make sure that when we deploy the client side components, they get upgraded properly. This is akin to Windows diagnostic data, right? Like it's the same sort of class of data where we use this data to check on the health of the components that are doing the elevations. The next one that I'm going to call to is the top one here, which is diagnostic data and managed elevations only. So for this one, if you set the setting, what would happen is you would get diagnostic data, but you would also get all of the elevation data that happened through EPM, the product. So any elevations that happened outside, like run as administrator or through normal Windows, wouldn't be captured here. Only managed quote unquote elevations would be captured. And then the last one is the one that Bryce wants, which is all endpoint elevations. So when you configure the data in this manner, diagnostic data and all endpoint elevations, what happens here is any elevation that the user completes on the device, or any user completes on the device, will be shown in the usage reports, everything. So you might ask yourself, why do we have this why do we have these different levels? It's pretty easy. There are privacy concerns in multiple different countries around the world around how much data we can collect and getting approval for that data. And we want to allow organizations, as they're going through that privacy approval process or making the right privacy decisions for their organization, to be able to collect the data that they're approved for and nothing more. So if you look on our docs, EPM docs, there's a data collection page. It literally lists each property that we collect and what we use it for. So that way, if you have any questions about the data we collect and what we use it for, show them it's there. If you feel like we could be more transparent in those docs, let us know. We'll be more transparent. I feel like we have the right level of transparency right now, but my perception isn't always the right one. So let me know if we can do more there. Bryce, that answer your question? Is it good?
Yeah, I'm good. And like I kind of had a little bit of a head start from talking to the cat team last week. So I figured I'd ask the question and also clarify, because initially I was worried that like I was only going to collect those values if the users started like trying to elevate with EPM, but we hadn't configured a rule. And the way that I understand it is, as long as the setting is turned on, it's any elevation that happens on the device. We get to see that so that we can use them to do those nice rule creations where we can just leverage the gathered telemetry to click some drop downs and say, oh yeah, I want to allow those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that I will say is that today the data that's in reports is pretty raw, and I think I probably already said this, but our goal is to get the raw data there and start collecting en masse. If you, especially through your cat team, if you have any reports that you'd like to see, let us know and we'll just build them into the product, because the data's there. It's just how we slice it now and what we publish. We have a lot of feedback about what we should publish, but reporting is as unique as an organization. So we don't just want to create 20,000 reports. What we want to do is build reports that everybody can use and then have a good method for people to pull data out into their own reporting structure if they have, some crazy reporting requirements or something. Okay, so that's that step. Now, last one is default elevation response. Now, what default elevation response does is it controls the behavior of an elevation that goes through that run with elevated access context menu if no rule exists. So at public preview, maybe this doesn't make a lot of sense. I promise we have a plan here. Because, if I only want them to elevate what we have rules for. So what do you mean? Like, why would I want that to work? Like, this is how I want this whole thing to function. Default elevation response can be used in sort of two ways. The first way, which is available today, is to set the elevation response and maybe enable like a scenario where somebody's a pseudo admin, right? So you could say, hey, I'm going to allow this person to elevate anything they want. They just got to provide a justification. So I can select require user confirmation and select business justification, and boom, I can elevate any app on the device through the right-click context menu, and I'm good to go. You might be asking yourself, self seems a lot like they're an admin. What am I getting here, right? You're getting business justification, potentially Windows authentication, and you're getting reporting, which you'd get anyway. So so you're getting those two things. When we introduced support approved in the July-ish, remember that's a very technical time frame, July-ish. When we introduce support approved, what'll happen is you'll be able to define a set of rules that require a support approval to be used for like PowerShell or command.exe or whatever. But then what you could do is you could allow everything else that you didn't have support approved rules for to be user confirmed. So like you'd be able to switch from like an allow list sort of functionality where I'll have to define every app that I allow to almost like a block list type of functionality where if I had like a developer per se, I could let them elevate everything except for the 20 apps that I require support approval for. And then they still have pretty wide berth for admin privileges, but at least you're blocking some things that are requiring support approval for some things that maybe you don't want them doing. So that's sort of how we envision this happening over the time frame. The other thing you'll be able to do with this validation setting is once we do support approved, support approved is the default, will be the default behavior of the client once we release that behavior. Today, the default behavior of the client is deny all that don't have a rule. But this would also allow you to tighten down that behavior, like don't allow support approval on certain devices, like by deploying a client settings policy to like, I don't know, maybe kiosks. You don't want kiosks to ever have elevations run on them. So instead of having the normal support approved behavior, once we release that, you want to just deny all elevation requests on those devices. You don't even want them to be considered. Like you just want to cut those off completely. So there's your flexibility there. Okay, so the rest of this is just an Intune policy. So use scopes, assignments, all this stuff's going to make sense. The one notable thing I'll call out before somebody roasts me in the chat is that assignment filter support is not there right now. Assignment filter support is in development because of the infrastructure we use. I think our friend on this call, Rudy Ohms, is probably going to have a teardown on the infrastructure at some point and show you how this might be different. So you should read that blog. So we're almost there. Assignment filters will be there shortly for those of you that use assignment filters. It's one of our highest priorities. So I deploy this. that turns on EPM. So now what I want to do is I want to define an app. So when I define an app, actually what I'm going to do is, you guys already know what the policy workflow looks like. So I'm going to go to the one rule to rule them all sort of scenario I have here. I'm going to show you a common rule that I created and show you how it works. So here's a rule I created for office setup. And you'll see here that I've given it a name. I didn't give it a description, but I chose my elevation type. This allows me to select whether this is a user confirmed or automatic elevation. Since I select user confirmed, I'm allowed to select 2 sort of validation options. In the future, we're going to add more. The one that we're sort of working on right now is fresh MFA. So you require somebody to fresh MFA, get a fresh MFA token from Azure AD in order to complete the elevation. And then I select some file metadata here. So what you'll see here is you'll see some warnings pop up if you use file name. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Matt, will that MFA prompt be triggered in authentication strings? Can I say I want a FIDO key for this authentication, or hello for this authentication, etc.?
Hello is built into Windows, so yeah. And yes, your question is Azure AD will govern the MFA transaction, and conditional access policy should apply.
Okay.
We're still actively building it. I have that on my list already, is like, how much CA policy can I use to control this? Like, one thing we also want to add is like only allow elevations on compliant devices as well.
Yes.
So like as soon as a device goes non-compliant, we sort of block elevations. But that's another interesting scenario, because like, what if the device needs to elevate to become compliant again? Like, how do we handle that race condition? And like, what if I need to turn on BitLocker and I have somebody standing there, they're ready to turn on BitLocker, but they can't because we won't allow the elevation to happen because the device is non-compliant, but they need to be compliant for BitLocker. Like, so we're still ironing that out. Microsoft is a big, vast place with tons of people who have different opinions, and we'll get there eventually. Maybe not as fast as some people would like, but I think it'll be great. So thanks for the question, Adam. Appreciate it. File path. I'm going to come back to signature in just a second. Hash, minimum version, product name, internal name. These, you might ask yourself, why would I add a file description, product name, or internal name to a rule? Doesn't make much sense. Especially for, the Office installer, it's bootstrapper.exe. Like, what the hell would I use that for? The reason why you would add these things is that they're protected by the file signature. So they can't be modified without invalidating the signature. So that's why we use them. That's why we put them here. Back up to this warning at the top. You'll see this nasty warning pop up when you just use a certificate in a file name. That's because when you supply a certificate like I did without potentially any additional properties that are part of the signature, you're basically any file could potentially have its file name changed by a standard user and then fall into the criteria for this rule. So you have to be very careful and make sure you're being very explicit about what you want to elevate. I've seen some comments on Twitter around like, hey, with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah, you're completely right. Like, like the people who are making this observation, they're completely like on the right path of, hey, make sure you don't get lazy with your rules because you'll regret it. So make sure that you build rules for what you need. And then the last one here is certificate. So certificate, the reason I came back to it was there's sort of 2 ways to use certificates. You can upload a certificate to this file. This is the base 64 encoded value, which is literally my least favorite thing on this page. We're going to, over time, add usable fields here that'll tell you what this certificate actually is. Versus the base 64 encoded value, that is much harder than you'd think. And then so I can upload that here, and it'll be stored in the policy. And then I select, is this a publisher file or is this a file that issues certificates for publishers? Right? Is it in the cert chain? That's the way that you can think about it. So is it an authority, or is it a signing cert that was used to sign this app? So is it the leaf or not? Right? So I can upload it here. The other way that I can use it is I can upload it to my reusable settings, which are on the first page. And then I can reference it here. So if I reference it, I can click add, and I don't have any certs in here right now, but then I could select a certificate that I've uploaded on the other pane and just use it here, right? So that if I was creating, let's just say a bunch of rules for files from the same vendor, maybe an internal, maybe internally signed files, right? And I have, my leaf certificate there that I'm signing all my files with. I can put that as a reusable certificate and then just add that to a bunch of rules and everybody's happy. Well, the problem when you upload a certificate to the policy is that if that certificate ever expires or you're using a new signing cert, you have to go through and you have to like recreate all of those rules, right? Or God forbid it was revoked, right? Your signing cert was revoked, so now you gotta modify all those policies. Using a reusable certificate object gets around that, because if you're using a reusable certificate object, all you need to do is go into that reusable object and update the cert, and it will update all of the rules. So you can have, the cert defined in one spot, use it across multiple places. We really, really, really want you to use signatures, because signatures are good. Just like driver's licenses are good for identification, and passports are even better, right? But like, it's really important. It's really important. So we're trying to make certificate management a little bit easier, and that's the other way that you can do that. So then when I go out and I deploy that to a device, again, it's a normal Intune policy. Oh, I should stop there. You can deploy this to devices or to users. It doesn't matter. If you deploy it to a device object, every user on that device gets this rule. If you deploy it to a user, only that user gets that rule on devices they log into, right? So that's the important sort of difference. So if you want to create a set of rules for, like, just say your IT support folks, and you want them to, you want them to be able to run PowerShell Elevated, but nobody else, you could deploy that to your support folks, and then they could log in and run PowerShell Elevated, but any other user on that device wouldn't be able to do that. It's just an example. So yeah, so that ends sort of my question on the console. My demo on the console. Any questions on the console or what I just went through? While I log into this device, try a live demo. Nothing? Quiet group here.
Actually, Randall is asking, so can you restrict on both, meaning that the user or this user can elevate these things on this device?
Yeah, we thought long and hard about this. For anybody that was in our private preview, we actually had some of this stuff in the rule. Like, actually, in the rule, there was a applicability setting. It was like, hey, does this apply to all devices or only certain devices, and picking groups of devices? What happened is that was not well received. It was just impossible to manage. So like, the issue there was, if I define the applicability to the rule, then let's just say you have a policy with 20 rules in it. There's no real good way for you to tell, which devices that policy was applicable to and what the behavior would be on that device. It was not great. So we removed it all. We tore it all out. Our plan at this moment will be to use user targeted rules with assignment filters. So you'll be able to build an assignment filter that allows you to tell, which devices that rule should apply to. And before anybody says it, I get it. We have to add some more stuff to assignment filters, and I'm working with Scott Duffy. Hopefully I just didn't dox him. So Scott Duffy owns assignment filters. I'm working with Scott Duffy to figure out what additional properties can we add to assignment filters to make EPM awesome, and by proxy, the rest of the Intune stuff awesome, because sometimes it just takes, people that don't take no for an answer and just put their jobs at risk to get, properties added to assignment filters, and I'm one of those guys. So we'll see what we can do from added properties. The big one we want to add is this primary device? Like, we want you to add primary user to an assignment filter, and I'm working with Scott to figure out how we can do that. So that way, you could deploy a rule that says, hey, this end user can launch this only on their primary device. The other one that I'm trying to get is maybe scope groups or scope tags. Like, so if you have the tag for that device, then it would apply. But that's sort of a weird spot, because tags are a pure UX concept and graph concept generally. So we use scope groups to, if you're not familiar with RBAC and Intune, we use scope groups to govern the assignment of policies and the assignment of objects. So it requires some stuff, and it's not going to probably happen overnight, but I'm pretty confident that we'll get there, and we'll do the right thing, hopefully. Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay. Cool.
There's a lot of comments. There's a lot of comments in the chat, but not a lot of questions. Actually, there's another one here. Is there a plan to support Linux and Mac since other products like CyberArk, Beyond Trust, and Delinea already support them?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, like, hey, here's the deal, man. I'll be honest with you guys for a second. Yeah, Mac OS and Linux make up such a small market share. I realize that the EDU market is probably more heavily geared towards Mac OS. That's not lost on me. But from a pure market share perspective, Windows is king. And so we went after Windows first. I have an open item for the second half of this year to basically build this for Mac OS. Now, I'm not going to commit to that. It's an item that we have in planning, but it's something that we really want to do. We really want to support Mac OS. And it's not going to be as easy as just building what we built for Windows on Mac OS, right? Like, Mac OS is evolving in the local user space as well. So we really have to do is sit down and sort of think about, like, what does EPM really mean for Mac OS? What do we want our product to do on Mac OS? And it may not be just, per task elevation. It may be something different or something more, or something, that's only a 60% overlap. So yeah, we want to support Mac OS. Linux, like, Linux is the wild, wild west of computing. Yeah, I don't have any tentative plans to support that right now, but in the future, our goal is to be cross-plat. So that makes sense. I know it's probably not the answer. It's probably not the answer you wanted, but it's an honest one, and it's the best I can do right now. Okay, so this is sort of a stage demo that I have set up here. So here's the Office installer. So if I right-click on an app, you'll see the Run with Elevated Access here. If I had an automatic rule set up, it'd be very anticlimactic. It would just run, and that would be like, hey, trust me, right? So I hit Run with Elevated Access here, and what should happen is I get the EPM prompt, right? So for this rule, the one that this device is getting, I have it set up to just require business justification. So test justification, hooray, EPM, okay. And then you click continue. And this is all that happens. What happens is EPM is now facilitated the elevation on behalf of the user, and Office does some weird stuff when it installs. Anybody on this call who's ever dug into the click to run installer will know that it should install a service and then do the entire install through the system service. Whether that's a good practice or not is probably a conversation for another day. But you'll see that all those service transitions and everything were just handled, right? So that's really the extent of our EPM. And, this is sort of the rule that I've been telling people to start out with, right? Like, start out with just automating an Office install, like, just, because nobody in any organization that I've worked with that uses Office really cares if somebody can repair Office or can, install Office, right? Like, it's one of the lower, I would call it lower risk apps, right? And make sure you play around with things like getting the minimum versions right, the internal names, product names, all that sort of stuff to make sure it fits what you need. Like for my Office version, I'm only allowing installer 15.7.26 and later, because that ensures that at least I'm getting a newer version of Office bits. Because the other thing that you may not know about Office is that it does cached installs, so it can install from cache. And you don't want somebody, sort of installing a really old version of Office Click to Run that has known exploits in it from, like, I don't know, Office, or from like the first version of Click to Run in 2018-ish or something, 2017, 2018, 2017. Okay, so yeah, I got 7 minutes left. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, Matt. Sorry,
Yeah, sure.
I was going to ask real quick. So you showed us what it does when it asks for a business justification.
Sure.
But there was an option for an admin, like request for approval, right? I forget what the exact words.
Yeah,
were.
support approved. Yeah.
What does that look like from, like, the IT admin who then gets requested that for that approval?
Yeah, I don't have a demo ready right at this moment. It's in development right now, but if I could if I could paint you a picture with my words, this is what I would tell you. it comes into a console. All right. And Rami is actually, Rami, our director of engineering, has actually already demoed sort of our rude workflow for it, like what the workflow looked like. So I can take an action, or maybe I give it to Scott after this. I'll send you a video. But essentially, what happens is that request, it looks very similar to that pane, only it says, instead of saying, let's see here. Instead of saying open this app as an administrator, it says request to run this app as an administrator. And then it says, please provide business justification, and you hit submit. And what happens is that goes off to the Intune service. And then it shows in a blade. It might actually be visible in my tenant. Hold on. That would be awesome. This is my production tenant, so I'm not sure if it's there. No, it's not there. It actually shows in a blade right here that says requests, right? And when you click on it, there's just rows, and the rows of requests have, basic information at the top level, device name, username, app name, that sort of stuff. When you click on it, you get the full app definition, hash, certificate that signed it, version, like all that metadata is there. And then they're able to just hit approve. That goes back to the device, and then they're able to just, do that user confirm behavior that you just saw for a given period of time. I think today the time is 4 hours. I think our goal is to have that be user configure or organization configurable. But yeah, it's 4 hours today, because there's nothing worse than having to install an app and finding out that Windows Update needs a reboot before you can do an app install. And that's the worst, right? So like we want to get away from that. Yeah. So that's sort of the thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And I just had
do you have to have the console open to see that notification, or as a IT do we get notified, or is there any sort of way to
we're actually just talking about notifications today. I think with our public preview, it'll just be in there. I think if I could explain to you our principles real quickly on support approved. We're not necessarily trying to enable asynchronous support transactions. And what I mean by that is a scenario where you just like hit continue, hit like request it, and then an IT admin who has never talked to you before like goes into the console, says, oh, look at Matt wanted this. Yeah, it looks fine. Hit approve. I think our first iteration will be for those guided sort of support scenarios.
Did we lose him?
Yeah. But in the future, we want to build.
Or did you
still
lose
hear me?
Oh,
can you guys hear me?
Yeah. We have you, Matt. I can actually hear both of you, but I don't think one of you can hear the other.
Oh, I can hear Randall. He just can't hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll keep giving my answer, and maybe he can watch the recording. I don't know. So, so in the future, we're going to have like a notification system potentially. We're really interested in integrating with other products people use to complete workflows. You can draw your own conclusions to what those are. And then, potentially, our entire console runs on Graph. So potentially you could approve and view requests based on Graph interface into whatever product you use and you want to put in there. So we're really like, our first goal in July is to get the framework there. And then post July, we'll work on ways to integrate that. Like we get that maybe not everybody wants to go into our console and hit approve. So how can we extend that? So that way it fits into the tools that you already use. That's my really long-winded PM answer.
I missed you in the middle because I disconnect. I don't know why my team's disconnected. But thank you. Yes, that was very helpful. I think it's fine if it's synchronous. I'm just trying to get. It's good for you to explain the process, because if the process is contact admin and then we just give it to them, and then they go ahead and do it. I think that's fine. I didn't know. And I think your explanation was great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Our security folks who are already like watching everything I do, including like every pay stub I open at this point, because they don't know what I'm gonna ship, they're a lot more comfortable with a synchronous transaction. When we get into asynchronous, they get a lot more worried about admins just not saying you guys would ever do this, but select all, hit approve, and had no idea what you just approved. Like that's the nightmare scenario. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we looked at apps, but what about other things in Windows that require elevation, like setting up a printer? Are we going to do anything with that with EPM?
Yeah. So EPM is technically capable of completing those tasks. However, today it is almost impossible to write a rule for them unless you wrote the product. So what's our plan? our plan is, and I don't know exactly how we're going to solve this yet, so I'm just going to talk about, the vision here. The plan is that there would be something along the lines of templates. What I mean by that is that you, as an end user or an admin, would pick a template out of the sort of EPM policy. Let's just say add a printer, and we in Microsoft would know exactly what calls needed to be allowed to add that printer, and maybe would take some more information from you from like, hey, only add printers of this type, maybe potentially, or whatever in the future. We got a lot of design work to do here. And we would sort of craft that rule and deliver it to the EPM agent. So like the EPM agent would still, on the client that proxies all these communications, would still behave the same way it behaves today. It would just, we need to figure out how do we do that translation from what you can say as an admin to what the client components understand as EPM, right? So that's sort of our goal. I have that listed specifically, not just printers, but system settings in general.
Right.
And I think it's pretty high priority at the moment. My dev team, I think, is going to look into it in Q2, and maybe by the end of the year, we're going to get something out there. But yeah,
Awesome.
keep your eyes on our docs page and all that sort of stuff. We'll be pretty vocal when we release it. Sounds like another vendor tool. Yeah, thanks, Rudy. Appreciate you. Okay. Any questions, comments, concerns? Anything else that I can do to help here?
There's some more questions in the chat, like what happens when offline and there's an app that needs an approval, so you don't have internet connection at all.
Yeah, so in our first release, so there's two things that happen. The only thing that requires service communication today is actually downloading the rules. Once the rules are on the device, doesn't matter if the device is online or offline, you can use the rules. It's fine. Now, when we implement the support approved scenario, this is something that we have to get right, which is, like, what if I need to support approve something that would help me get back online, like the instant, what would be one of those things? One of the things would be like installing a network driver, installing client-side network access components that get me back on the network, stuff like that. We have to figure that out. This is really complex because I think probably in the top 5 threat vectors for tools of this nature is offline approval, malicious actors manipulating offline approval to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
So we know that we need to do it right. We know that it needs to be solved. We don't have an immediate sort of like, hey, we're going to do this on this date, but we know as part of our support approved work that we need to have a flow for this.
Yeah, I can tell you, we worked and actually got working. You can integrate Duo into UAC and require 2-factor using the Duo service. But exactly what you're saying, when you talk about offline scenarios, it gets really, really tricky, because then you get in a situation of, well, you either have to decide whether you're going to fail closed or fail open. And if you fail open, it's a huge security hole. Right. And if you fail closed, you can get yourself in a situation that you can't get out of. And now you're in a catch-22 of, well, now I can't do anything and I can't enable stuff, and I'm just completely locked out of the machine.
Right. Yeah, you're completely right. Yeah, and you just reminded me of one other thing. We have a principle on our team, which is like, we shouldn't make the device harder to manage. It's not our goal. Some other products in the space may inadvertently do that. So it's important to note that normal Windows UAC and elevation is completely unimpacted by EPM. So like, if you ever get to like a break glass scenario or break fix scenario, if you're a full admin on the device and you log into the device, it behaves just like you're a full admin. There's no craziness you need to do, or you need to figure out how to work around the tool. The tool should never make administering devices harder. So that's the other thing I'll throw out there. But yeah, we are at time. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any more questions. Scott knows where to find me. Richard knows where to find me. Everybody knows where to find me, I think, in general. I'm on Twitter. You can just harass me on Twitter. I mean, give me great feedback on Twitter. If that's your thing. If it's not your thing, I'm not on Mastodon or whatever else everybody's boycotting Twitter for. So that's it. Email me. I don't know.
All right.
Matt, thanks a lot this is a great, I even learned a lot today. So thanks for your time. Really appreciate it a lot.
No worries. Always happy to help.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
No
All right,
worries.
guys. Well, take care, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming, and we will see you all next time. Have a good week, guys.